Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Ralphthemoviemaker official podcast. And this will be a film podcast where I'll be discussing some movies, unscripted and unedited. And, I already have a film podcast, which I've been doing for about 5 years, over 100 episodes. But this podcast will be different. It will be a bit shorter, and it'll just be me and occasionally guests, but it's, mostly me. And let's get started. I'm looking forward to starting something new. I've been doing that other podcast for a long time. I just thought I wanted to change things up, and that's what this is. So let's get right into it with the film discussion, and then I'll be moving on to some questions which I got off of the Sardonicast Reddit. There will be a Ralph the Movie Maker podcast Reddit where you can leave questions for me, but for now, since I just started, I will just take questions from the Sardonicast Reddit, which I'll get to at the end. So for starters, let's talk about this film. The film I picked this week, or this episode, or whatever, is Pinocchio, the new Disney film, 2022, the live-action Pinocchio, starring Tom Hanks and directed by Robert Zemeckis. And, Pinocchio is one of those stories that's been done a lot at this point. There's definitely a lot of Pinocchio movies. Most recently, there was this Russian film, Pinocchio, A True Story, which is terrible. The Roberto Benigni one, which is like nightmare fuel. I actually saw that as a kid. I thought Pinocchio was great. Like, I that was one of my favorite Disney cartoons growing up, and it's not like, I don't think it's the best Disney film from that period. It's not the best Disney animated film. There's probably other people who would say, Cinderella and Snow White and, those other ones that are probably more famous, but to me as a kid, one of my favorite ones was Pinocchio. I hadn't even seen Snow White or Cinderella. I still haven't. Pinocchio, he was my dude. He was a cool dude. I really liked Pinocchio. I thought he was cool. I liked the story. I liked the look of Pinocchio. I thought he was adorable. And, I remember going to Disneyland for the first time when I was a kid, and I wanted to go on the Pinocchio ride, and I did, and I enjoyed it. I was a Pinocchio fan. I like the story of Pinocchio. I think it's a good story. I enjoy the way Disney told that story. I really like the 1940s film. I was sure to watch it again after this one. After I saw this one, because this was like such a like just an insult, kind of. I don't want to jump on the bandwagon here with this film. I think a lot of people dislike it. It has something like a 2.1 on Letterboxd or something like that. I'm just going to double check. Yeah, it has a 2.1, which is not... That's actually pretty freaking bad for a film, like, on Letterboxd. There's not many films that are that low. And I just, like, okay, so let's like, not shit on the film. Let's not, like... let's not jump on the bandwagon here, because I like Pinocchio. I like the dude. He's a cool dude, and I just wanted to like take the film on its own merits and not compare it to the original one, and just see like, okay, maybe there's something to appreciate about this film. I don't want to jump on the bandwagon again. Let me find something to like about it. And to be fair, there's a couple things I like about it. For starters, this is like this is a Robert Zemeckis film starring Tom Hanks, and the whole like first 20 minutes of this film is a kind of like a one-man play with like Geppetto going around his house interacting with all these CGI characters, and I'm like, okay, this part is kind of cool for like kids. I could see why like someone would enjoy this. I enjoyed that it was just like it almost could have made like for a really good short film just about Geppetto walking around his house. And Tom Hanks is good. He gives a good performance. It's all him at that point. It's just him. It's like, Castaway all over again, which is a Robert Zemeckis movie. Tom Hanks, it's a one-man kind of a film basically for most of it. If you haven't seen Castaway, that's a really good movie. There's some of my audience members who are younger. They might not have seen that. That's definitely a great movie. Tom Hanks is an accomplished actor. Robert Zemeckis is an accomplished director. They've made great films. Castaway is one of them. And yeah, the first, I don't know, 20 minutes or so of this film is just like, yeah, okay, I can get into this because it's just Castaway, except Tom Hanks is Geppetto, and it's not about like the CGI Uncanny Valley shit, which I saw in the trailer. I knew it was gonna be terrible at that point. I'm like, man, that CGI looks so fucking weird. And here it's like, okay, it's just a one man play with Tom Hanks. He's doing a decent job as Geppetto. I enjoyed his performance. It's not like CGI heavy. It's not like The Lion King or Aladdin where there's all this like CGI bullshit going on. But then the film, once it starts getting into the actual story, like once it's after that 20 minutes and they start like developing the actual plot, which is, Pinocchio comes to life and the fairy godmother comes down and makes Jiminy Cricket the conscience. And once it starts with all like that stuff, that's when the movie, goes downhill. That's when it gets like really kind of bad. And I thought it was better than the Russian version, Pinocchio: A True Story. Like, I would not give it a half star, but that's not really saying much because, like I said, I like Tom Hanks. I like the beginning. I thought it was like kind of chugging along at that point, but then once it gets into the real story, and especially when they start getting into like the fox and the cat, that's when the movie started to get like almost unbearable. Like it was actually like difficult to watch. I felt like I was on fucking drugs watching this movie. It was like, what the fuck is going on here? It's so bizarre. The animation is so weird, and I don't know. I just could not get into it. I did not like the look of anything in this film. I didn't like the look of Pinocchio. I thought he looked like a CGI mess. And I'll give props to like the CG animators for rendering a realistic like wooden doll, or there's definitely like some good like texturing and lighting and kind of things like that. But as far as the design of Pinocchio itself, it's like really odd, and they try to like incorporate all these like cartoonish like elements from like the 1940s one, like those designs, and they just put them in this film in live action, and it doesn't work. Like you see the goldfish, and it has like these lips and these eyes that are very human-like, and yeah, that works in 2D animation, but in 3D animation, alongside like live action characters like Tom Hanks, it just looks very weird. And the same with the cat, and the same with Pinocchio himself. They were really trying to go for that 1940s look of Pinocchio. They just like copy and pasted it into this film. And I don't know if that really worked. The movie it was hard to watch. It was really hard to watch. I just can't stand what Disney is doing with these live action properties, with these remakes of classic cartoons that they've made. It feels so cynical, and this movie made me kind of sad. It made me kind of miserable watching it because it felt so cynical. It felt so like Disney is just, they're doing this for money. It's only made for like the littlest of little kids. Like that's all I would recommend this movie to, is like really little kids. And there's just like nothing else to appreciate about it. I'm shocked I have as much to say about it as I do, honestly, because it's just like a totally cynical cash grab, and it made me sad. I was like Miles Teller in Whiplash. I'm upset. I'm upset. I was upset. Like watching it, I wasn't even like angry or like trying to nitpick it or anything. I'm just like, this is like sad. And it could have used like a J.K. Simmons or something. Like Geppetto should have said like, "You're not gonna find any Mars bars down there, Pinocchio." Like that would have made the film better. But there's just nothing going on. There's nothing to say about it even. It's just dumb. Like, it's just another dumb Disney live action remake. Like The Lion King or like Aladdin or like any number of those. It's just so like pathetic. You can't even like say much about it, you know? Then there's this scene at the beginning. Like I like the beginning, but there's still this like terrible scene, which I'm sure many other people will mention, where Geppetto's like clocks go off. And that's in the original too. He has like these. He's a clockmaker. He makes like these really elaborate clocks that are made out of wood, and that's why he's like skilled enough to make the Pinocchio puppet. But like here, they just felt the need to throw in a bunch of references to Disney films. Like you see like Snow White and the Seven Dwarves come out of the clock. You see Roger Rabbit come out of like one of the wooden clocks, and it's just like, why are we referencing a bunch of Disney films in this film? It's so pandering. And does this even like tie in with the time period that Pinocchio is supposed to be set in? Because is this supposed to be set in 1940? Is it supposed to be set modern day? It's so confused. Like they didn't have Roger Rabbit in 1940. It just makes it, it's just so bizarre. It's such a bizarre choice to have included that. And it just feels like padding and pandering. It's just like so dumb. And the pacing for this film, Jesus Christ, once you get past that opening scene, which it's granted it's way too long, but that's still the best part of the movie. But like once they got done with the Geppetto thing of like 25 minutes of him walking around his house, it like it gets really fast paced. Like in the original Pinocchio, the Geppetto part I think is much shorter. It's probably like 15 minutes or so until Pinocchio shows up. This movie they stretch it out much more because the Tom Hanks bit is like decent and you want to see more of that. I'm like, okay, I don't mind seeing more of Tom Hanks. But then once they get into the Pinocchio story and him meeting the fox and him going to school with it's all like bam, 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 bam. He goes to school, bam. He goes to the donkeys, bam. He goes to the puppet show, bam, bam. It's like fucking constant like stuff happening. It's so quick. The pacing is so fast that you get like no emotional resonance from anything that is happening. It's so rushed. The story feels like so quickly. It's so quick. You don't have any time to attach yourself to anything happening. It's just like they wanted to get the movie over with. Like just get this movie over with. Everyone's here for for the money. We're just gonna make money off of the Pinocchio brand, rush through the story, make it 90 minutes long, so for like little kids to watch, and then just like who gives a shit it out. And it's so like cynical. I couldn't believe how bad the pacing for this film was. It was way too fast. It was way too the story was just told so quickly to where you got no emotion from any of it. And they throw in a lot of lame, modernized jokes. Like, they make a Chris Pine joke. Like, the fox says, you should have been called Chris Pine or something like that. I'm like, what? What the fuck is going on here? Again, is this supposed to be set in modern day? Why is this fox? Like, why is there a fox at all? If in a 2D animated movie, these things work. You don't have to, like, think about the logic of it. It's like, okay, there's a fox and a cat that are homeless, and there's like all these weird things going on. But in a 2D animated film, it just works so much better than if you try to make it live action, because there's a certain expectation of like logic. But I guess the people watching this movie just don't care. They're just like, what if the Pinocchio movie was made today? And it's like, okay, it would be live action and have all these like elaborate CGI effects, but that doesn't capture the essence of what worked about that film, the 1940s one. It doesn't have the animation. The story isn't as resonant. It's rushed through. It's basically the same exact movie, except told much worse. It's just a much worse version of it, to where, if I had a little kid, I would show him the 1940s one, because it's a much better film. Yeah, it's older, and the animation's like a little. It's just the animation's still better than this, but just the fact that it's an older film might turn a lot of people off. But it is still just much more watchable than this is. It's almost 80 years old, and it's still a better film than this is. And honestly, I didn't laugh once in this film. I didn't smile. I didn't chuckle. Nothing was funny or emotional. It was just rushed through. It was cynical. They tried to like have these other characters like the girl puppet and the seagull. I think Lorraine Bronco played one of the characters. I think she was the seagull. I think so. That's who she played. I'm trying to like yeah. So yeah. Luke Evans was the coachman, and Cynthia Erivo was the blue fairy. Yeah, that scene was very weird. Just the CGI on her. Like I like Cynthia Erivo in what's that film? Bad Times at the El Royale. I think she's good, but it's just like very very strange in this film. And Joseph Gordon-Levitt as the cricket. Honest John is Keegan Michael Key. Yeah, Lorraine Bronco was Sophia the seagull. That character was like so thrown in. Like every character, they just rush through everything to where it just feels like a bunch of random scenes. It just feels like a bunch of random crap. You can't even connect with like the story or what's happening in this film because it's so rushed. So going back to like the pacing, the end of this film is just terrible. Like the last act of it, where they get in the whale, and the whole point of the whale is like it's supposed to be kind of a low point in the story. You're supposed to like feel trapped for a little bit, but that whole part of the film is so rushed through. They're in the whale for what feels like a minute. They're like in the whale, and then Pinocchio's like, "Oh man, Geppetto, we gotta make a fire," and then we get out of the whale. And it's like a minute and a half of them in the whale. They just fucking rush through the entire thing. They rush through it, and they get out of the whale in what feels like 2 minutes or so. It's like, okay, so what was even the point of like going in the whale if you're just gonna leave like immediately after? It's so freaking rushed. It has no resonance at all. And then they try to do this because it's the end of the movie. They try to do like this tugging at your heartstrings thing where you think Geppetto is dead. You think he drowned, and Pinocchio's like, "Oh no, Geppetto!" And you see him crying. He's obviously not dead. Geppetto is not dead. Like, this is not the kind of film where that's gonna happen. So I'm just like, it's so boring. Like, yeah, he's obviously not dead. He's gonna wake up, and it's just like so stupid. The end of this movie is just terrible. They just rushed through the entire thing to get to this ending, and it's just like everything goes on too fast. And then, I was really curious about how they would tackle the very end where Pinocchio becomes a real boy. Like that was the part I was curious about. That kind of made me sit through it because I wanted to see how they would tackle that. And I'm like, maybe they'll get like a live action like actor to show up, and so Pinocchio, the CG guy, will become like a basically a real kid. But that's not what they do. What they do, I guess, spoilers for the end of this film, is they like Pinocchio walks away, and Jiminy Cricket's like they try to keep it like ambiguous. Basically, Jiminy Cricket's like, well, some people say that Pinocchio became a real boy, but we don't really know for sure. And then it's like, what? Like, and then you see Pinocchio walk away, and his wooden form becomes like a kid, but it becomes like a CGI kid. It's like a CGI person that they animate walking away from the camera. You don't see his face. And Jiminy Cricket's like, we don't really know what happened because that would have been too difficult. The end. And it's like, that was the whole movie. The movie was over. It's just another rushed plot point. Like, that's one of the best parts of the original movie. That's like the only emotion that you're supposed to get out of the ending. But instead they throw in some bullshit with like Geppetto dying, but he's not really dead. He comes back to life. And then, Pinocchio walks away from the camera. Jiminy Cricket's like, I don't know what to fucking tell you. The movie's over. Just move on with your life. And that's it. It's like, wow, that sucked. That ending was terrible. That was a terrible way to end the movie. It's like they didn't even care. Wow. And yeah, this movie's so short. It's only 90 minutes. That might be a saving grace of it. I honestly don't have much else to say. I feel like I've been repeating myself because there isn't really much to say about this film, honestly. It's like really cynical, really bland. it tells the same story, but it's told terribly, and it could have used like it honestly didn't even need to be made. That would be like my biggest thing. It did not need to exist at all. We did not need this movie. From concept, it is a bad idea. And I'm looking forward to the Guillermo del Toro one that's like stop motion. And I'm sure there's other adaptations of Pinocchio since the original one that are decent as well. But this film is really bad. It's almost unwatchable. I'd say it is unwatchable, not almost unwatchable. It's just cynical. It's like no one gave a shit about this movie. It's just made for the money, for the brand recognition of Pinocchio, and that's it. I'd give it like a 3 out of 10 or 4 out of 10, something like that, just because, I liked Tom Hanks in it. I thought the first like 20 minutes was tolerable, but then once it got into like the actual story and all the uncanny valley CGI, that's when it got really shitty. It's like really dumb at that point. So yeah, I could not recommend this at all, except to like the really littlest of like fucking like 4-year-olds. Like that's 4-year-olds. That's all I could recommend this film to. Now fucking 4-year-olds, 4-year-old like anyone from a toddler to a like a 5-year-old. That's like the only demographic I would say should watch this movie basically. And it's on Disney Plus for free. I guess that makes it, a little less of a commitment on my part. But yeah, it's just like this weird. I felt like I was on drugs. I felt like I was high while watching. I'm like, what the fuck is this? This is bizarre. It doesn't make any sense. And I don't know. I could not get into this at all. I hated the design. I hated the design of Jiminy Cricket. I just hated the whole. Like it was just so dumb. I could not get into this film at all. So yeah, that's Pinocchio. Thanks for listening to me talk about it. I wouldn't recommend it. And yeah, so let's move on to some questions. Like I said, I took these off the Saronicast Reddit, but if you want to ask me questions, you can go to the Ralph the Movie Maker Reddit, Ralph the Movie Maker podcast Reddit, and I will be posting questions there. So the first question is from Just Too Good. Thoughts on Manchester by the Sea? I recently watched it, and everyone online there seems to be a debate on whether the movie is a schlock masterpiece or a hard-hitting drama of a depressed man. So basically, what are my thoughts on Manchester by the Sea? It stars Casey Affleck. I think there's some things about him that are questionable in terms of his character. But as far as the film and his character in the film is great. I really liked his performance in it. I really thought Manchester by the Sea is great. I think it's a great movie. It's a really emotional film. Like I don't know why people would call it schlock at all. I think it's like fantastic. It's really great drama. Really great performances from Casey Affleck and Michelle Williams and all these other actors in it. They were they did a good job. And yeah, I just don't see why people would like shit on it. It's a great movie. I mean, I really don't. I have like zero negative things to say about it. I thought it was fantastic. It's really a really depressing film, really emotional. If you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend Manchester by the Sea. I really enjoyed that film. It's yeah, I don't understand that kind of criticism at all, calling it schlock. Like, Moonfall is schlock. Jurassic World Dominion, like, that's schlock. Like, that was... Manchester by the Sea is, like, a real drama. I don't know. I think that's kind of dumb criticism of it. Can you just... So this is from JVass685. Can you describe the moment where you first realized that movies could be meaningful, emotional, beautiful works of art? The first time I watched A Clockwork Orange, then explored Kubrick's catalog, felt like it opened up a new world of possibilities for what cinema can do. Yeah, that's a good one. Clockwork Orange is one I saw it pretty young. Like I was probably like 11, 12, like around there, and yeah, that's definitely one of them. I'd say a huge like formative director for me was Tarantino. That was a director I saw very early on in my life, and the first Tarantino film I saw was actually Inglourious Bastards. It was right around the time it came out, when did Inglorious Bastards came out? I think it was like 2008 or something. Yeah, 2009, right. So I was probably, yeah, like 11, 12 years old, something like that. And my dad showed it to me because he knew I liked movies. He knew I watched a lot of movies and I wanted to be a director and and a writer or whatever. He knew I liked movies and he showed me this movie. He's like, "Ralph, you should watch this Tarantino movie." Like at that point I didn't know who Tarantino was. He's like, "Watch this movie." And he's, my dad's not a big film buff either, but he knows Tarantino obviously, and he's just like, "Pay attention to like how this guy like directs his scenes, like how kind of unconventional compared to like the films I'd watched at that point, which is like Transformers or whatever. Like just pay attention to like how all the weird things he does, like with the title cards and scenes that are out of order, and like the shot where Eli Roth is in the theater seat and they do like the circle and you see the bomb like in his leg, and like all these little stylistic choices. The fact that there's like a few main characters, not one main character, Shoshana and Brad Pitt, and there's like even Hans to a certain extent. Like he's like, just pay attention to that, pay attention to like the long scenes, like the style, the dialogue, you know. That's the first time I was like really watching a film. I'm like, wow, this is like crazy. Like the way he's like directing the scenes, the way he has this style. It's not just like conventional shot reverse shot or like trying to maintain like this sense of realism. It's like really stylized and fun. It's very playful, and that's when I really fell in love with that kind of filmmaking. I'm like, this is great. This is like super weird. I wasn't used to that kind of thing at all, and that's what made me explore like all of Tarantino's films. And one day I watched Pulp Fiction on television, and it was like halfway through the film, and I watched the whole thing. I'm like, that was great. I gotta go back and watch the first half now. Not that that matters for that film either, because it's all told out of order. And there's just like, yeah, it made me fall in love with Tarantino and films like that, art films, and yeah, it was. He's definitely one of those formative directors for me, where I'm like, this guy has a style. I like the personality he brings into his films. I like the dialogue. It's the first time I really started to notice things like dialogue and editing, cinematography, acting, like those kind of things. Like Christoph Waltz in Inglourious Bastards, that was great. I started to notice things like tension, all these like things that were important in making my movies, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I'd say Inglourious Bastards for me. That was like, and Tarantino in general. But the Inglourious Bastards was definitely the first movie I saw from him, and that's one of my favorites from him. I love that film. That's a great film. Um, so here's one more. We'll do three for now, and then we'll wrap up. Which movie antagonist villains do you think were actually justified in their actions and do the correct thing? Um, there's a lot, one person says Nurse Ratched and Cuckoo's Nest. I'm like, yeah, that's a good answer, because she is trying to help these like kind of crazy people in a mental hospital. I'd say a good one for me that I go to like whenever people ask me about like villains with motivations who make sense. I say Magneto in the X-Men films. I think that's a good answer. Magneto is I think he's a good villain. He's one of the best villains in like those comic book films, because his motivation makes sense. He's not just like a bad guy who wants to destroy the world. His philosophy is that mutants are very kind of oppressed in society, and obviously a lot of people go after them, try to hurt them. The government goes after them in the X-Men films, and he's just trying to, in a way, defend his people, right? Defend mutants, and to some extent, his logic makes sense. Like he's trying to help his own kind, and it's comparable to kind of like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, where Malcolm X was far more radical and Martin Luther King was far more peaceful, and like so Martin Luther King is like Professor Xavier and Magneto is Malcolm X, and so he's more, he believes in more advocating like kind of bad things like violence to achieve his ends, but in his mind those ends are justified because his actions are justified because he's trying to protect mutants at the end of the day. He's not doing it to destroy the world or some kind of corny motivation. He's doing it to help people like him. And the whole backstory they give him as well, where he was in like the Holocaust and he saw like what kind of human beings are capable of, and how they could do the same thing to mutants one day. It's him like trying to prevent that from happening. And yeah, his character, his motivation makes sense. I really like him in X-Men First Class. He's very like almost kind of likable in that movie. And yeah, over time, I'm not saying he's a good guy. He does bad things. He tries to kill people and destroy the world. He's a bad guy, but he makes his motivation makes sense as a villain. You understand where he's coming from, and you could almost sympathize with him to a certain extent. That's what makes him a good villain for me. I'm sure there's other villains out there, but that's just one I go to like right off the bat. As someone I like, yeah, that's a good villain. That's like very his motivations make sense, and he's very like you usually get good actors to play him too. Ian McKellen, Michael Fassbender. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. I guess that's episode 1. Thanks for watching. It's been fun. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I always enjoy talking about movies. That's why I figured I'd record myself, because I'm just like, talking in my car to myself about Pinocchio. I'm like, I might as well record a review of it and like maybe make people happy or whatever. Okay, just spreading my film knowledge seed around YouTube. All right, so thanks for watching again. Be sure to support Ralph the Movie Maker podcast on Patreon, and also you can also support the Ralph the Movie Maker Patreon as well. And yeah, leave your questions on the Reddit for me to answer next time. I'll get around to your question eventually. So thanks for watching. Bye bye.